ado, please welcome Sean Percival from 500 Startups.
All right, great. Thanks for having me. So I'm slightly jet lagged, so if I don't make any sense, that's the reason. I drank half that beer, so I'm getting slightly drunk too. So this should be a pretty good talk. Now, tomorrow I'm going to talk about sort of venture and fundraising in Silicon Valley. Tonight they asked me to talk about something a little bit different. So I'm going to talk about Bitcoin. Now, just so I can understand, like, where is everyone? So how many people here have Bitcoin or are using Bitcoin or have any idea what that is? Okay, good. Only a few, or you're really shy. Okay. I know I'm in the Baltics. You guys are naturally shy, but I really want to have a lot of good Q&A. So please continue drinking. Get through that sort of shyness. Think about questions you might want to ask. Can talk about fundraising, life in Silicon Valley, dating advice, whatever is helpful to you. Let me know. Let's see. So do we have a presentation? Okay. So it's good that there's not a lot of people that know Bitcoin because this is sort of a 101 type thing. Really quick. Let me sort of go through these points here. So as she mentioned, my name is Sean Percival. I'm a partner at 500 Startups. If you don't know, 500 Startups is the most active seed investor in Silicon Valley. We've now done about 1,200 investments altogether, and about 100 of those are mine. Specific to Bitcoin, I've done about 12 investments into that space. Very early, maybe sort of a third of them have already died, and we'll talk about what's happening there in that space. I also ran the Accelerator Program, so 4 times a year we run an Accelerator Program in California. We do this in Mountain View in San Francisco, and basically this is a 4-month sort of intensive, get your shit together, grow the business, and go raise money. And so, as you probably know, there's a lot of Accelerator Programs out there. In the States, there's probably 1,000 or so. There's kind of only 3 that matter. It's Y Combinator, obviously, they're the number uno. They did Dropbox, Airbnb, these really big companies. We're sort of humbly or not so humbly number 2. And then there's Techstars is sort of the other biggie too. Now I'm actually, I'm not doing the Accelerator anymore, so I'm actually focused on the Nordics. And so I'm working on sort of Stockholm, Oslo, Copenhagen primarily, and a few announcements coming next week. But at the same time, very interested in what's going on here. I'm going to be doing a little bit of work in the Baltics, and then we have another partner that's actually going to get dedicated to this region, Russia, and Israel as well. So I should mention, like, 500's not like most Silicon Valley funds. We actually do invest outside of Silicon Valley. I would say 90% don't. The joke I usually say is, like, VCs in the Valley will only drive as far as their Tesla will take them. That's about 200 miles, in one direction. And like, why is that? I'm spoiling some of the stuff I'm going to talk about tomorrow, but the big reason is, like, they want you to be in the Valley. They want to make an intro to Facebook, and then you can go drive over, 10 minutes away and see them. It's a little bit harder if you're 5,000 miles away. At the same time, like Silicon Valley VCs, like, we really only have 2 jobs. It's deploy capital and generate a return. And if we're getting returns from other countries, who knows what's going to happen? The tax issues, all the sort of legal hoops they have to go through. So they don't want to put any sort of barriers between getting our money back and getting as much as we can. So those are sort of the big reasons. Come by tomorrow and also Saturday. I'm going to talk about some sort of hacks for how you raise money from Silicon Valley investors, how you get access to the Valley as well. I'm on Twitter, just my last name, @Percival. So you're welcome to follow me or heckle me, make fun of my jokes, whatever you like. So before I was doing all this and became a VC, I'm a founder myself. I would say that's what sort of sets 500 apart. All of us have operational experience, so we're not like 50-year-old white dudes like most funds. No offense to any 50-year-old white dudes out there. We're all fairly young. We've all been doing startups in the last 1 to 2 years. So we know what it takes to build a business today, not what it took 10 to 20 years ago. I was vice president of a site called Myspace. Everyone's still on Myspace, right? You're all still there? Yes? No? One person? Okay. So this was interesting in the sense of, I had never really worked at a big company as large as this. I was their vice president of marketing. I was in sort of the turnaround period as we were trying to save. At the time I joined, we were actually still bigger than Facebook. There you go. But what happened is obviously Facebook overtook us, and they've gone pretty far since. MySpace peaked at about 100 million users a month. Facebook just released data; they're at 1.5 billion a month. So markets have changed, but we sort of lost it, and we're not able to sort of recapture it. So what happens there? Okay, well, when you sort of have bad technical debt, which we had a lot of, when you had sort of a drive to over monetize the site, which we did, the story I usually tell about is like, well, we created MySpace books because somebody paid us to do that. People were not going to MySpace to talk about literature. They were going there to like listen to music, to get laid. Like books were the last thing from anyone's mind. So we did these things constantly, just trying to over monetize the site. Facebook, if you remember, they didn't make any money for a long, long time. And everyone was really worried, like, is this actually going to work? It wasn't until some of the mobile ads and other things took off that we saw that it would. And prior to that, like, before I started this whole journey, like, I actually was a janitor. That was my first job. This was in '99. This is how I got into startups. I was actually cleaning the offices of some the first dot-com boom companies. And it was great. I worked the graveyard shift, which, to us is midnight to 8 a.m. And I was cleaning these offices, and I went into a few of the startups, and, like, I just remember, like, they were drinking Mountain Dew and playing video games, and the boss was, like, smoking a cigar in his office. I was like, fuck, this is cool. This looks a lot more fun than being a janitor. And so sort of worked my way up. I did a little bit of everything. I did tech support, I did programming, I did design, I got into marketing, and then eventually became a VC. And sort of tie that all up, how I became a VC. Dave McClure, he's sort of our boss and syslord. He invested in my last company. And I had known him for many years. He invested in my last company at a time when we were actually struggling. Company was doing okay. We were making good revenue, could not get the funding we needed. So he literally made the investment and said, hey, I'm going to make this investment. Sounds like things are not working out. If it doesn't work out, you're going to have to come work for me. And I sort of laughed. I was like, great, yeah, give me the money. Like, I got to make payroll. And sure enough, 6 or 9 months later, we were out of business. And so I called him up. So if you want to be a VC, raise money from 500, fail, and then we'll hire you. And that's actually happened several times. Okay, cool. So I guess general view, I've had the best jobs and the worst jobs in tech. All right, let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin now. Let me get a little drink here. So once again, raise your hands if you've actually transacted with Bitcoin and you've actually used it. There's got to be more. Really? No? Okay. I thought you guys like to hide money here. No? No one? Okay. All right. So let's do kind of a 101 primer. And then, as I mentioned, like, be thinking about your questions. You can ask anything. If you've ever wanted to ask a VC a question, like, this is your chance. So really, really be thinking about those good questions or bad questions. So why Bitcoin? Why do people care about this? So, I mean, the first and most interesting point is there is no central authority in Bitcoin. And it's funny when a lot of the first articles are written, it's like, oh, the Bitcoin CEO has been arrested. It was like, well, no, like a CEO of a Bitcoin company has, but there is no CEO, there is no central authority. If you want to think about sort of Napster, it's Napster for money, so it's a peer-to-peer network. Payment freedom and efficiency. So depending on where you are in the world, it may or may not be easy to send money. In America, actually the bank system is really crappy. It takes 3 to 5 days to wire money. Longer sometimes if you're doing checks and other things too. Bitcoin basically is about 10 minutes to send money. And that's 10 minutes to send $1 or $100 million. Doesn't really matter what it is. So that's really, really quick and efficient. The other challenge is the efficiency also drives low cost. So a lot of people are looking to Bitcoin to do remittance, which is, I want to send money to my cousins in India, but I really don't want to pay Western Union 10%. In theory, you could do it for free with Bitcoin. Although most companies that do this, they need to make money, so they're charging 1 or 2%. So think about that's kind of interesting on sort of a global level, that like, if you're sending $100 to someone in India, if they're taking away $10 for transaction fees, that really affects how much money they get at the end of the day. And in a country like India, a $9 difference is a lot of money. So it really sort of helps and speeds that up. So security and control is also interesting. So with Bitcoin, like, you are the bank. You hold the keys, you own the vault. So this is good and bad. And I remember I got into it pretty early. My dad, I gave him 1 Bitcoin for Christmas. And this is a few years ago. And he called me like a week later and he was like, it's gone, what happened? And it was like, turns out like his Yahoo account had been compromised and they saw it come through and they just went in and got it. He was like, oh, what do I do? Like, who do I call? I was like, well, you can't really call anyone. So the onus is on you to manage and control the money. So if you lose your password, if money is sent, there is no recourse. There's no way to get it back. At least with a credit card, if somebody steals it, you can call them up and they'll reverse the charges. That's something you can't do. So you have a lot of security in the sense that you need to sort of own that and understand what that means. Now, this is why Bitcoin is not making a massive leap for consumers, because consumers are not smart. You guys are smart. Some of you, I hope. But you're techies. You understand computers. General consumers do not. So when you start talking to, your parents and grandparents about encryption and two-factor authentication and all this stuff, that's not something they want to know or understand. So this is why it's having challenges making that sort of leap to consumer. I wanted to kind of go through the history just so you have a little bit of the backstory. So the first sort of appearance was in a white paper, and it was under this name, Satoshi Nakamoto. And as far as everyone understands, this is basically a pseudonym. So this is either one person, him or her did not want to disclose who they were. Another popular theory is that this is a group of people that came together. The weird paranoid theory is that this was created by a US government agency, and it was so interesting and powerful that somebody pushed it out the back door and said, this has to go out. And so they obviously couldn't put their name on it. So the truth, we honestly don't know. But Satoshi has his name on the white paper. He or she basically sort of released a client, which started everything. This is 2009, so it's actually been around for a little while. And then also same year, he mined basically what they call the Genesis block. So this is the first time that a sort of a transaction was created and a block on the blockchain was created. And we'll talk about what that is. Now, this person or these people, they actually own a lot of Bitcoin. They own a massive sort of stack. And what's interesting about Bitcoin is there is full transparency, so we can always see when any money moves. And everything that they created and all that they're sitting on, at one time it was about $1 billion in value. It's a little bit less today, but that money has not moved. So whoever this is basically is not moving the money. They withdrew from the project a few years ago, just right when it took off. They used to go into forums, they used to interact with people, and that really stopped once it got to sort of a crazy hype. And it's not really clear what happened to this person. Newsweek did try and expose who they thought this person was. Turns out that probably was not the case. They harassed this poor old guy, and it's pretty clear now that he wasn't the right person. There's lots of theories, but there's no sort of concrete evidence. So it starts going, it's a real geeky thing. The only thing people that are into it are people that are into encryption, people that are into PGP, it's sort of really geeky technologies. But it started to pick up a little bit the next year, 2010. Sort of the big milestone there is somebody finally transacted in the real world, and they bought a pizza. And so they bought a pizza for 10,000 Bitcoins. So at the time, that was $20 or so, and obviously the price went way, way, way up, at one point that became, the $10,000 pizza. It wasn't until 2011 that it really sort of took off and got very popular. And what happened is it was in a few news articles. Press loves a good story. There also was what you may have heard of called Silk Road. It was the underground drug market. It's where you'd go buy drugs or hitman or all kinds of weird stuff. And of course they used Bitcoin because it was anonymous or pseudo-anonymous. And once that press got out, it's then everyone was like, okay, I gotta jump in. I gotta try and figure out what this is. And that's what was getting people really excited. WordPress started taking it in 2012. They were one of the first sort of reputable brands to do it. 2013, the market cap passes $1 billion. So this is the sort of aggregate value of all the Bitcoins out there. So a lot of us that came in here, and I was here middle of 2009 or 2010, we bought Bitcoin for really, really cheap. So we were sort of pseudo-wealthy for a while, depending on the price. But the other concerns well, what's going to happen? How is it going to be taxed? Is it asset? Is it commodity? Do I have to pay capital gains? And then the IRS finally came out 2014, and talked about, yes, if you make money on this, you do need to pay taxes. We're Uncle Sam, we care about taxes. And so, that finally did come out. And then sort of where we are today, and I'll talk actually a little bit more about current state of the union, but I don't know, I sort of thought that this is the year that Bitcoin grows up. We had to sort of move through some of the rougher times. The bad actors had to get pushed out, and many people got arrested or had other issues going on. But now is actually the time where people like Barclays Bank and real institutions are using this technology, or at least beginning to test it. For a long time, they just wouldn't touch it, just because there was so much weird news and there's so many sort of, like I said, bad actors and weird stuff going on. So this is a year that sort of things are actually maturing. This is a little old, but you can sort of see this is the price in dollars. And you can see it had a slow start. I mean, there wasn't really a ton of activity in the sort of the early days. And this is the sort of November run-up. And it peaks at about 1,100. We came to find out, too, that because the market cap is actually not that large on Bitcoin, and there's not that many of them, it's actually pretty easy to manipulate. And we actually found out that majority of this was being caused by one company, one person actually, who had sort of created a bot that was going through. And so this was a bot that was running on Mt. Gox. And Mt. Gox was the Japanese company that was the big one that everyone was excited about. Turned out that they lost $400 million worth of Bitcoin. They had all kinds of weird stuff going on, and the CEO was eventually arrested. That's what many people assumed was the CEO of Bitcoin, but he was the CEO of an exchange. And so they unfortunately were sort of inflating the market. You also had Chinese investors. Chinese investors are always looking for new assets, new ways to put money, new ways to hide money, whatever that might be. So, when sort of real estate's having challenges, you notice there's always a spike. But once again, a lot of this is driven by manipulation, and there's some good data on that now. And as you can see, then it just starts to sort of crash. This is like the bad news about Mt. Gox. It comes back, and then this is where we start to get into okay, well, it's just there's no adoption. There's less usage. The exchange volume is dying down. So it's been a bit of a decline. If you follow the news, though, you see that there was actually a huge spike last week, and now it got back up to $500. That's the first time it's been $500 in 2015. But of course, once again, there's another story following that. A Russian guy has his Ponzi scheme that he's running, and somehow he's manipulating the market. Also, there's once again challenges of real estate in China, and then money's pouring in too. So unlike a lot of public stocks, Bitcoin can be fairly easily manipulated. There's a lot to Bitcoin. I think that's why I got really interested in it when I first sort of started. I got into it when I had that business that was failing, and I was sitting around, the business was winding down, and that's when I started sort of understanding what this is. And I talk about Bitcoin as a lot like an onion, where it's just fuck, you just keep peeling back layers and layers and layers. Oh, it does this. Oh, there's this. You just keep finding new stuff. But let's talk about sort of the three sort of big sort of parts of what Bitcoin is. The most important is the blockchain. And so the blockchain is basically sort of the ledger. It's all the transactions that are happening in Bitcoin. So you can actually see every transaction all the way from day one. Every time anyone has moved money around, it tells you how much money, where it was moved, and a little bit of other metadata. A lot of people are now trying to sort of talk about blockchain as the technology versus Bitcoin. Once again, Bitcoin has that dark cloud over it. Oh, that's the drug stuff, or that's the weird stuff. Blockchain is thought more of a protocol. So blockchain could be thought of more as like TCP/IP, the sort of backbone of the internet. So it's a ledger. It does record the transactions. You can also append information to it. So there's other use cases, not just for sending money around. If I wanted to sort of track equity, if I wanted to put the deed of a house on the blockchain and I sold my house to you, I could send it to you, and the transaction's complete. So this is where people are sort of transitioning. People talk about now Bitcoin is a bad word. Don't say that, especially if you're fundraising. You say blockchain. So let's see, also mining. So this is actually how the network actually is built and how it processes all these transactions. So the Bitcoin network actually is the most powerful computer in the world based on all the computing power that's there. There are very, very, very large farms that are just sort of all they're doing is mining and cranking out Bitcoin all day. Many of them are in China. This is mostly they look like data centers, except what they're using is very specialized hardware. It's kind of like a graphics processor on crack. It's not a CPU. A CPU is actually not that good at doing the math that's behind Bitcoin. Graphic processor, a GPU, is much, much better. So it sort of went CPU, GPU, and then now there's actually sort of really specific dedicated hardware. It does nothing but mine Bitcoins. So it's hardware that's been created specifically for that. It's even taken it to the next level. So I wouldn't be thinking about yes?
Yes, I have one question.
Yes, I have one answer. Go ahead.
Yes. What do you mean exactly by cranking out or mining bitcoins?
Yep.
How exactly does it work in the process?
So it's basically trying to solve a very, very complex math problem. And everybody's trying to solve this problem at the same time. The first person to solve it is given a reward. And the reward is bitcoins. So right now they're given 25 bitcoins if you solve the problem and basically create a block. And so everyone's trying to compete, everyone's trying to solve these problems. It used to be 50 bitcoins. They've sort of set it up so it halves every so often. So that's what they're doing. It's sort of computational intensive. They're trying to solve this algorithm, solve this problem. The first one gets that payout. Yep. So it's not something you can do. Someone did a funny post about what it would take to solve the problem on paper, and it was like 50,000 pieces of paper in an absurd amount of time. So the mining is important because you need strength in the network. You need the network to be spread out. One concern of Bitcoin is if you control the network, you could do whatever you wanted. So you could send false transactions. You could reject transactions. So they call this a 51% attack. So if you had 51% of the network, you would sort of own the network and you could manipulate it. So there's always concerns that the network is well diversified, that there's many different players that are sort of running it. And right now that seems to work. There are pools, and these pools are sort of like a lot of miners that get together. Sometimes they do get a little bit too large. They get too much of a share. But then everyone sort of yells and screams and they take it back a little bit. But that is a concern. So that's the only way that you can sort of override the network. Otherwise, there really is no way to send false transactions. There's no way to change the ledger. It's sort of absolute. It's in stone and there's no way to adjust it. And then on the sort of other end of how do I get money in and out? This is obviously important. If you want to buy Bitcoin, you're probably not going to mine it. You're going to basically go to an exchange. Exchange is just like a public stock market. You put in your bank account, you wire the money, you give them a credit card, you trade dollars or euros or whatever it might be, and then you're basically buying at the market rate. So this is what determines the price. Every exchange has their own price, although they're all pretty equalized. Because if one exchange was higher, people would just arbitrage against that. So they all stay relatively the same and stay together. Okay, so other things, and maybe this is also why consumers struggle with this too. And if you're kind of old like me, you remember website addresses and email addresses used to be really, really long. Especially if you had a CompuServe account. That was like fucking 40 characters. Very hard to type in. This is your address, similar to an email address. So this is where if I wanted to send you money or vice versa, that's where I would send it to. So obviously you're probably going to hopefully cut and paste that. It's a public address. You can also take this address, put it into various websites, and it'll tell you what's going on with that address. All the transactions that come in and out, how much money is sitting in that. So this may be one reason why some institutions or banks are not too crazy about sort of Bitcoin itself. Depending on what country you are, sometimes you don't want people to know how much money you have. But not with Bitcoin. You actually would be able to see what every address houses. There's millions of addresses out there. This is where it actually gets hard. We actually don't know how many people are using Bitcoin. The estimates are in the sort of 500,000 to 1 million range. There really is no way to tell. There's no, monthly active user figure. There's no unique visitor number with Bitcoin. You can't use addresses because as a single person, I could have thousands of addresses, hundreds of thousands of addresses. And so there's no way to tell. So this is your address. Think of it as like your email address. And then there is also your private key. And your private key is your password, let's say. So this is obviously a little bit longer. This is what is securing the information that's here. So, typically if you use an online wallet, you use a simple password and they store the key for you. Some wallets will let you store the key, depends on where you are. The super techie sites like blockchain.info, they want you to have full control. So they let you kind of hold the key. Something like Coinbase, which is the sort of friendly consumer one, you don't really interact with these large numbers. You're dealing with sort of a pretty UI and it's very easy to sort of interact. Yes, go ahead.
Who generates the site address?
Good question. It's just sort of generated from the wallet itself. So there's no body like someone that like ICANN who does domains. There's nothing like that. Yeah.
Your address just generates for your address and
Yep.
key. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, and you can do that from any wallet, and it'll just generate a new one for you. If you want to kind of check out some of the big players that are here, this is a little outdated actually. This company's gone out of business, but these are kind of the two biggies. So blockchain.info, I consulted for them for a while. Coinbase. So this is sort of the, how do I say this? This is like the libertarian, you control everything. This is the Silicon Valley pretty consumer version. Zero Block is a mobile app. It sort of tracks news and price and all that good stuff. CoinDesk is kind of the TechCrunch of Bitcoin. So this is where all the sort of Bitcoin news is being shared. That's sort of the leading publication. Gift, this is a company that we invested in. You know, they allow you to easily buy Bitcoins, to convert them into gift cards, to make it a little bit more usable. And they sort of really tapped in because a lot of people had Bitcoin, but we didn't know how to spend it, or the companies we wanted to spend it with didn't accept it. You know, like Walmart doesn't care. I'm an American, so I have to use Walmart as an example. But like Walmart doesn't care about Bitcoin, so I can't go in there and use it. But I can get a gift card. I can turn my Bitcoin into gift cards and then go there. So this company was able to sort of tap into the sort of the growth of Bitcoin. They drove it up and it had a really nice exit. And then payment processing. So this is also interesting. So when you think about a really strong use case, merchant accounts are, you know, credit card processors. You know, they're hard to get sometimes. They take 2 to 4% depending on where you are. They have other transaction fees. So once again, just like remittance, you know, you can use Bitcoin as a payment processor to collect money and then avoid all those fees. Many of these started out with 0% fee because they're trying to get adoption, trying to get users. They're going a little bit higher now, but you know, once again, I think that these are 1%, you know, versus 4%. So if you're doing a lot of e-commerce volume, that can save you a fair amount of money. Okay, cool. So I want to talk a little bit about where we are today. And so if you don't know what this is called the Gartner hype cycle. And so it tracks everything that sort of hypes, that booms and busts. And as you can see, there's typically a technology trigger. You know, something new happens. There's this massive peak. And if you correlate this or put the price graph on Bitcoin, you'll see that it's like really similar. But you have sort of this peaking of, you know, it's this peak of inflated expectations. And Bitcoin was definitely that, oh, it's going to save the world, it's going to do this, it's going to kill all the banks, they're so evil, it's going to do all this stuff. And so everyone got too hyped, they got too excited by it. So this massive peak. And then we have the crash. And the crash is sort of the bottom is the trough of disillusionment. Oh, it's not going to work. Oh, we screwed up. Oh, it's too early. Oh, they don't understand it. You know, all these other issues. Don't fall out the window. And so this was tough. And this is a lot of people lost interest. You had a lot of people running in the market, a lot of people getting excited. And then you have this big, big slope. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe there's something here. So this is kind of when the banks were like, well, maybe we do want to look at this. And maybe you can buy something other than drugs with this. Like maybe there's some real use case. And then I sort of pointed out where we are. And so we're actually right here. So it's the plateau of productivity, which means it's actually super boring in Bitcoin right now. There's no like big headlines, there's nothing exciting. Most of the funding has dried up. I've actually stopped investing in Bitcoin companies just to wait and see. But mostly I was investing in companies and they could never get downstream capital. So I didn't want to keep pushing early stage companies into the market and have them not be able to attract more capital. So once again, things are boring as shit, but it's good. Banks are jumping on. It's going to be 2 or 3 years as sort of the adoption picks up and we find sort of the true use cases of Bitcoin. These are kind of real basic getting started sites. You know, Bitcoin.org is kind of the official site. You know, lots of good information. We use coins. They'll give you a little bit. They'll sort of show you how it works. They'll give you a wallet. So these are good ways to sort of get started. I think that's it. Yeah, that is it. Okay, cool. Love to take some questions, Bitcoin or other stuff. Yes?
How does it technically work? When I know, for example, from, let's say, $50 to Bitcoin, do I get 1 Bitcoin? Can I use it for micropayments or only in bigger blocks?
Yeah, I think that's a really common question, where especially when it was $1,000, people are like, well, I want to try, but I don't want to try for $1,000. So Bitcoin can be cut up into many, many pieces. So you would be given sort of 0.02 or whatever the equivalent is. So yeah, you can transact in all the way down to, you know, less than a penny worth. Yep.
The next question, you say everything is transparent, you can follow every transaction, but how is it then used for drugs? When you
What is he
have
talking
a bigger
into?
view,
Okay,
when you have the bigger view, then you can analyze where all the money is going and see the patterns. So,
yeah, and that's what's interesting. That's the weirdest mic I've ever seen, but yeah, that's cool. So And I thought that was interesting too. So I invested in a few companies that were doing like blockchain analysis. And sorry, I'm like sweating like crazy up here. But you can look at it, but once again, you could be doing a lot of activity, and I can't tie it into you. You know, I can't be, oh, that's the weird microphone guy. Like I'm not able to sort of detect that who did that, but I can follow your trail. So this is how a lot of people do get eventually busted when they're doing bad activity, because it's like pulling a string, where it's like, oh, okay, they just need to find one point of the network that they can identify as you, and then they can follow everything else too. So you're right. So it doesn't have your name on it. It doesn't have your IP address. It doesn't show that level of detail, but you can sort of go through it. Now, people, if they do want to hide it, they use what they call mixers. And what this does is it like takes your money, splits it up in like 50 directions, you want a different address. So that gets really, really, really tough. And yeah, the feds don't like that stuff. But that's one way people sort of hide it. So it depends on your level. All right, yeah, a lot of questions. Let's go. Yeah. It's a good question, and people have tried to break it since day one, and the answer is no. And so there has been sort of one issue that they had to sort of do a fork and correct it. There's been sort of one major fork, and so there hasn't really been any ability to break it. And people try and break it all the time. Like never underestimate the patience of a bunch of hackers sitting in a dark room somewhere. like they will just pound and figure out ways to do it. So, you know, it's interesting. The code that the Satoshi, that they wrote originally, it actually was pretty bad. But what he did is he hired, or not hired, but sort of gathered 5 people. They're kind of like the Knights Templar of Bitcoin. They control the GitHub. And so they're the core devs. And so they can make little adjustments to the code, but like it hasn't really broke. There's been stress tests. There's people who have been like, okay, today's the day. There was one just recently, a few months ago. Like, today's the day. Flood the network with junk and see what happens. And it's held up. There is one thing though. It's like the Visa network, like the credit card network, has a lot of sort of input-output. At Christmas, I forget what it is exactly, but that's processing a shitload of transactions. Bitcoin cannot do that level of volume just yet. So it definitely would create a choke point. That 10-minute verification would go to 20 and 30 or longer too. So far it's good. It's interesting that they've sort of able to take this technology, you know, one person or a small person wrote sloppy code, a few people fixed it, and it's held up all this time.
Sorry.
Yep.
So, I mean, obviously some very, very complex computer systems have been created to do the calculations and crack the algorithms. Have there been any applications of those sort of new ways of calculating beyond Bitcoin?
No. Are we using this processing power for good? No, I mean, like, yeah, you may know SETI. SETI was the search for, you know, extraterrestrial life. Very similar. This is much more powerful. But no, I mean, no one, like, short of quantum computing, no one feels that there's going to be anyone that can crack this, just based on the encryption level that's being used. Can it be used for other stuff? A lot of people are thinking about that. You know, could you create the next Dropbox based on all this network and this ability? So people are testing with it, but nothing substantial yet. Yeah.
You already mentioned you stopped investing in Bitcoin startups. Do you think you've lost the belief that Bitcoin will become the next general currency for consumers online?
I definitely haven't lost complete, you know, faith in it. You know, it's been hit a bit. I think my challenge was like, so I was, you know, vice president of online marketing in Myspace. I've done e-commerce sites. I've done content. All my experiences in sort of consumer marketing. So I felt that was the best thing I could add to the Bitcoin world. And you can't consumer market to a market with no consumers. So I think that's why I got concerned. So in the Valley, like, we do tend to get ahead of ourselves many times. And we're like, oh, why didn't it work? You know, oh, we're just 5 years too early. So I met with some really smart people in the industry. I was the one being like, oh, this is taking over the world in a year. And they were much smarter than me, like, no, it's 5 years away. And I sort of laughed and said they're an idiot, and turns out they were right. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait. You know, I've made those 12 investments. I feel like our fund has good coverage. I covered all the major buckets. I will probably do more, you know, middle of next year as things sort of shake out. But I think I'm renewed seeing the banks come in. You know, the banking technology, a lot of the way we move money around through banks, that technology has not changed in 30 to 50 years. So it's due. And if you want to think about an industry that's like huge, it's great. Okay, Uber is interesting because the taxi business is large. Like, think about the money business. Like, think about how much money is moving around and how many opportunities are there. So, I don't know, sorry, kind of rambling answer. So not completely lost faith. We'll definitely jump back in. I just feel like I have enough coverage now. I don't know. And I came to the Nordics, I kind of fell in love with it, so I want to try things here for a few years.
Thanks for the talk.
Yeah, cool.
It seems like it's a very much fluctuating currency, which is a problem. What do you think, from what you've seen, how strong is the derivative infrastructure for Bitcoin? How easy it is for someone to hedge their positions, to short Bitcoin, do other kinds of options or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a company called Hedgie, and that's what they do. So there's lots of services that help you. A lot of people ask, too, they're like, well, if I'm a merchant and I sell something for Bitcoin, if I sell it for $100, I want to get $100. I don't want to cash out the next day and find out I got $80 because there was a bump. So merchants, a lot of times, they convert to fiat right away. So they convert to local currency, so they have no currency risk. There's definitely services out there that help. As well too. There are derivatives in the sense of, like, there's altcoins, which I didn't really talk about, but there are other versions of Bitcoin out there, and some people arbitrage those against each other. So there's one site, it's a Russian site called BTC-E. This is kind of the biggest sort of altcoin arbitrage site. So there's a lot of that activity too. But there's solutions that you can put in place where your Bitcoins come in, it manages the risk, and in many cases can actually get you a little bump, 2 to 3% more of your money, letting them arbitrage for you. Yeah.
I had two questions.
Yes.
First one is about the kind of the blockchain technology. I've heard comparing Bitcoin to Napster in the sense that similarly Napster did not succeed, but the peer-to-peer networks did. So are there any other kind of applications of the blockchain technology that you are maybe investing or you think that have a really good future? And the second question is, I heard somewhere also about the climate effects of so much computing, and people are worried. Can you comment on that? Is there any basis for those kind of worries?
Yeah, I mean, the big sort of use case that everyone wants to make happen is what they call smart contracts. So it's, once again, putting information on the blockchain because that information can never be changed. So smart contract could be anything. It could be ownership of something. It could be equity. So think about, like, for the startup folks out there, you have equity, you have a cap table. It doesn't really exist. Like, you could actually make it physical in some sense, where it's like, okay, you have 10%, I have 10%, you have 20%. Okay, we don't like him anymore, he's fired. He sends, his 20% to us. And there's a record of the transaction, and then we actually sort of hold the asset. So smart contracts is what everybody wants to happen, but there's no issuances that are, like Wells Fargo is not being like, yeah, we're going to do this. No one has stepped up yet. So that's kind of the big one. What was the second question you had? I forget. Yeah.
Climate change.
Yes, we're killing the climate, true. And it is. It's using tons of energy. It's creating all these hardware devices are toxic in some sense too. So yeah, there's a lot of talk about that. There is alternative networks that don't require so much computational power. So you can have your own blockchain. It doesn't have to be the Bitcoin blockchain. So you could make one that is what they call proof of stake. And that's just sort of like, instead of a proof of work, that's a challenge with Bitcoin. So it's a proof of work algorithm. To get rewards, you have to prove that you did the work, and the work is very intensive. Proof of stake just means that you own it, or you can hold the asset, and there's much less computational power involved too. So yeah, I don't know. How does it compare to all the other bad stuff we're doing in the world? I don't know. Hard to say. Elon's going to have all of us in electric cars in the next 5 years, so maybe that'll offset it. I don't know. But it is computational intensive. It does create a lot of energy usage as well. This is why most of the usage is happening in China, where power costs are very low. Power is more in abundance. I don't know. Maybe Bitcoin goes to Iceland, where they have sort of infinite power, because there's already data centers there. But you're right. There is an ecological concern with it. Yeah.
Hey,
yes,
thanks.
but really quick, a lot of people, though, when they bring that up, they say, well, think about how much gas is used for armored trucks, moving all that money around. Probably a lot more impact. So if we could get rid of that using Bitcoin, then it's a good thing. Okay, sorry.
Hey, thanks for 101. I was fascinated about Bitcoin's idea from the very first day, but there's one thing I can't really get. What's there for original Bitcoin creators now? Do they get any money out of it?
Yeah, I don't know. That's what we don't know about we don't know who the creator is, remember? So this is Satoshi, guy or girl, who knows? Or team people. They have tons of money. They're not moving it around. So I don't think they did it for monetary reasons. Because if they had, they would have cashed out a long time ago. So I don't know. Maybe we'll find out. Could be a person, some nasty government. It's really, really hard to say. But they are not trying to get rich. They would have cashed out a long time ago. Or who knows, maybe they're dead, I don't know. But that money has not moved and nobody can move it for them. Short of going to their computer and logging in and getting access to wherever this wallet is sitting, that would be the only way to to move that money. So yeah, nobody knows. Lots of people that got in early, they did benefit financially. A lot of us, I bought Bitcoin at $10, it shot up to $1,000. That's a pretty good return on investment. I know several people that bought Bitcoin for pennies. And they're living on an island right now, having a very good life. So early adopters did definitely make a lot of money. The creator, we just don't know. But that makes it fun. It's kind of mysterious, Other questions? Yeah. Remember, any questions too? Silicon Valley, fundraising, dating advice. Yeah.
I have a question about somehow different issue about shared economy, all the things about shared economy.
Sure.
I read PricewaterhouseCoopers this year report about this thing, and there was said that right now this industry is about 35 to 50 billion dollars. Yes, and after 10 years, in 2025, this industry will be 350 billion dollars. What do you think about these figures, and if this is true? Do you suggest to think about startups, to making startups in this, like a shared peer-to-peer auto sharing or peer-to-peer renting things?
Yeah, we invest in a lot of these companies, and especially in the Valley, where it's like on demand and crowd sharing. So I can get a car, an apartment, marijuana, anything in about 15 minutes with my phone. So they're definitely sort of pushing the envelope there. Sharing economy, yeah, it's exciting to me. It's yield management. You have all this sort of unallocated assets that are just sitting out there and not being used, and a network and a large network can leverage them. So yeah, I think that it's only going to grow. The numbers and the data behind Uber and Airbnb are pretty astounding. And they're not really old companies. And they have legislation they're fighting against. And a lot of consumers, you could walk in the street and be like, oh, have you ever Airbnb'd? And they'd be like, where, Airbnb what? There's still people don't know what this is. Millennials, early tech adopters, we use it, and I stay at them almost every time I travel. So it's yeah, I think the sky's the limit. These have a lot of opportunity. Also in e-commerce, peer-to-peer e-commerce, investors hate e-commerce. It's very hard to get an exit. There's not really good exit opportunity, really high overhead to get a business going. But a peer-to-peer network where people sell to each other, super easy to scale. Uber would not exist if they had to hire every car and they had to build their own fleet. So for investors, this is the power of software and the power of networks. So yeah, I think we're only at the beginning of the sort of sharing economy. There's a lot of countries where it just doesn't exist. I do a fair amount in Norway and Sweden. There's not a lot going on. There's not a lot of sharing. There's not a lot of on-demand, even though it's a really affluent country.
I have a friend who have a peer-to-peer auto sharing platform here in Latvia, it's from Estonia.
Yeah.
And they're thinking about growing in all Europe. Maybe Eastern Europe.
I think so. I would look at that. I would look at the States and China and India and look at if the models are working there, how do you apply it here? It's going to be on a smaller scale. There's less audience too. But you can easily create clones of these businesses in any part of the world. And that's actually what we invest in. We had the opportunity to invest in Uber and we passed. We were really stupid. The valuation was $10 million at the time. It's 45 billion right now. We thought that valuation was too high. So we passed, but we invested in all the clones after. So we learned our lesson. Yeah. I think we have one here, and then we'll go back there. Yeah, go ahead.
Once again,
I think this is the last question, sorry.
Once again, about founders of, let's say, founders about Bitcoin, yes? So they don't move money at all from their wallet. So it's quite possible they just lost a private key for it?
Could have been. Yeah, you're talking about the creator of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Yes, has not moved. Any of the money that they created has been stuck since it was created. There's a few test transactions, but no money has moved ever since the beginning. And trust me, people are watching that, because as soon as that moves, it's going to be like, oh, he's alive, she's alive, boom, something's happening. But yeah, it's there and it's watched every day. There was someone that tried to fake the transaction to show, and then they realized it was a fake transaction, and that didn't happen too. So yeah, once again, that all those Bitcoins from the original days are sitting there, just stuck. But it could be as easily as, yeah, they lost the key. and they're like frantically kicking themselves trying to figure it out, or who knows, But you saw the key, you saw how big it was. Like, you're not going to guess that number. Cool. All right, this guy's super eager in the back. Can we get one more question?
Okay, the final question.
Okay, one more. Can we get him the box?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Where?
Yep.
What about inheritance? If a person dies, can the children then get through the will then all the bitcoins?
That's good. Yeah, you're not. Yeah. So yeah, if they have access to it. So yeah, I have like a special vault basically where I have a lot of important stuff, and in there is my private keys for my stuff basically. So, and I've sort of instructed my wife that if anything were to happen to me, that's what you would do, is you'd go get these keys and you'd follow these steps. So that would be the only way. The other thing, there is something called multi-sig, where you could actually have the money. This is like the nuclear launch, where it's like 2 people turn the key and it goes. So you could have a multi-sig situation where with 3 people, someone you trust, someone else, and you pass away, and then those 2 people can use their key to then move the money. So that is one option, to use multi-sig, to allow, 2 out of 3 people could then verify. It could sort of, I'm trying to think how to word this, but could authorize a transaction to go through. But otherwise, yeah, they would need your login to Coinbase. They would need your private key to get access to those funds. But yeah, people put them in wills. I mean, you can put whatever you want in a will. It doesn't matter what it is. And so this is already an issue. I don't know if it's come up where someone has passed away, and I'm sure it has, but where someone's passed away and they couldn't access the Bitcoin. But it's very possible. Yeah. All right, we have one more question here, but I think we're going to end this. They're getting very angry with me. I'll hang out for a bit, though, if you want to come say hi. Cool. All right, thank you, everyone. Great.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sean, for the presentation. I personally learned a lot, actually, about the Bitcoin. So